This video is going to walk you through the second essay for the semester, and the goal of this is to analyze themes. So I'm going to just kind of go through this assignment sheet step by step. It's pretty long. I will glaze through the rubric and just talk about how it's slightly different from your previous essay, but as you're reading through and viewing this video, if you have questions, if you need further clarification, please let me know. There's a lot of information in this assignment sheet. The goal is for that to be helpful, but it can be overwhelming. And so if you need me to clarify, just let me know. All right, so just like your previous essay, this one is worth 200 points. And the goals of the essay, it's really two big ones. First of all, it's kind of pulling out what we talked about at the beginning of this second unit, which is theme, trying to identify a theme shared between two texts that we have read this semester. There's also a secondary goal, and that's to get you guys introduced to scholarly research. And for the most part, we're looking at scholarly articles published in ProQuest or JSTOR or any other database or scholarly journal that maybe you have access to. But that can also incorporate, or literary criticism can also qualify as scholarly research and is often more so used as the foundation of making an argument about a text. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can qualify this assignment based on how much of a challenge you would like to give yourself. So just kind of keep that in mind as I go through. The prompt is really simplistic, and then as the assignment sheet develops further and moves on, the concepts become, I think, a little bit more clear or much more detailed. So when you're reading the prompt, if all you want to do this week is read the prompt and then come back to this assignment sheet later and kind of hit on the specifics that you'll need to build your essay, that's understandable, and that might be a good way to approach this information. But I'm just going to walk through all of it right now. All right, so my go-to strategy is read it, pause when I need to explain, and then move on. The prompt is select two of the texts that we've read so far in the course. It could be any reading from weeks 1 through 8 if you're in the summer class, or weeks 1 through 16 if you are in a longer semester. So really anything we've read this semester. Perform, or if you've already done a close read on this text, or either of these two, re-perform a close read on both of the texts in order to identify a theme shared by the two. So if you need to, go back and watch that theme video, view the theme PowerPoint. Some people might say, well, our textbook has another text that I'm really interested in, and I really want to write about it instead, or include it in my assignment instead. That's probably okay, but I would like for you to just email me and tell me the texts you're thinking of talking about. I will likely ask you a couple of questions and then decide from there. So if you have a text that you would much rather write about, then please email me so that we can talk about it. I'm not saying I will say that that's okay, but I'm not saying I won't. So if you're wondering, just please let me know. Let's talk about it via email. Your assignment is to write a 4-page essay explaining how the theme is shown in each text by analyzing the author's writing choices. So you can look at the plot, you can look at character development, you can look at the conflict, internal conflict, external conflict, you can look at the tone, the structure of the text. Really, any component of the text can help you identify theme. This should absolutely be text-based. You've got to incorporate the text in your essay, both of them. And then, again, that secondary goal, in addition to analyzing evidence from the text, I also want you to engage with at least one scholarly article to further your analysis. There are a number of ways that we can engage with scholarly articles. You might find a scholarly article that interprets a text or the theme of a text in a way that you completely disagree with. It is perfectly fine then to use a scholarly article as fuel for your argument and kind of like a jumping off point to say, you know, some critics or scholars interpret these texts in this way. However, a much more significant, interesting, appropriate, modern, whatever you want to say, a different interpretation is, and then you go off with yours. So I usually will remind students of that type of engagement with a scholarly article if I have a student emailing me saying, I can't find a scholarly article that supports my idea. So just know that that's also an option. Regarding scholarly articles, and I think I will mention this a little bit later on again, make sure that when you're incorporating a scholarly article, you don't just paraphrase or summarize their ideas and say, or imply something like, my evaluation of theme or my interpretation of theme is correct because this scholar agrees with me. So you still have to be the one who's doing the majority of the analysis. The scholarly articles cannot take the place of the work you need to do in this paper. So that's always just kind of like my my little, you know, warning sign is that. I have an asterisk next to scholarly article here because I want to talk about critical theory for just a second. And the theme PowerPoint and video, I ran through some critical lenses very quickly that you can approach a text from. You don't need to understand, at this level, you don't need to understand the fundamental theorists' ideas in order to approach, say, from a psychoanalytical or a queer theory perspective. However, students who would like to challenge themselves, instead of looking at scholarship, you can look at theory. I do think it's harder because literary theory, I don't know, essays or books or whatever, that stuff is in depth, it's very intense. But if you are looking for more of a challenge than this prompt is already giving, might I offer that suggestion? So you can replace, if you want to challenge yourself further, you can replace a scholarly article with a literary theory text. Now, a few examples, that would be something like Freud's interpretation of dreams, where we see him practicing that psychoanalysis. That could be an essay published by Jacques Lacan. That could be a Marxist text, you know, something written by Karl Marx that you're using to interpret a theme. So any of those, again, fundamental texts that underlie literary theory, you can use in lieu of a scholarly article. If you're going to do that, let me know. I would like to talk to you a little bit more about it just to make sure you understand kind of what I mean when I say that. I don't really expect anyone's going to email me and jump at the gun here for this, but I want to offer it because I think it could be something worthwhile for you to do, especially if you're looking for going in a little more depth. All right, so here is a quick example of essentially what I'm looking for you to do in this paper. So a student has identified that both Eliot's The Wasteland and Byron's Darkness share this theme that death is inevitable. The student will analyze the perspective of the speaker, the author's diction, and fire imagery in order to support this interpretation. And then the student will also bring in a scholarly article titled Byron's Orphic Poetics and the Foundation of Literary Modernism by Christopher Strathman in support of the interpretation of theme. So that's kind of what the paper will do in a nutshell. Here you see the two texts texts that the student's going to analyze, the overarching theme they're going to identify, how they're going to identify the theme by looking at specific parts, and then what scholarly article they're going to bring in to support their ideas. And these are the big components of your essay that I want you to have. So if you write your rough draft and you try to give like a quick example summary of yours, make sure that you can work through those 5 things: your text, your theme, this is 4 things: your text, your theme, how you're approaching your analysis, and the secondary source that you're using. Okay, this is a lot to talk about, y'all. So I have structure on here, but I have it broken up into 2 parts. The first part is just a very basic overall structure of your paper, which I borrowed from a lovely source from the internet. I thought it was just so helpful in continuing to clarify what I'm looking for in this paper. And then I'm going to go into another structure that's much more detailed and looks really similar to the structure notes from paper 1. So what this basic structure is doing is reminding you that you are writing about 2 texts, and I do not really want your essay to be one text in a chunk and another text in a chunk, because if we're talking about finding similarities and similar themes, it's easier to see that an essay that needs to score an A, you want an A on your paper, is going to weave the texts together methodically and logically, but it's going to weave those texts together so that you're looking at each focal point at a time. If I jump back to this example, what I mean by that is a very successful essay will first look at the perspective of the speaker of both of the poems, The Wasteland and Darkness. Then it will look at the author's diction or word choice of The Wasteland and Darkness. And then the essay will look at fire imagery in The Wasteland and Darkness and kind of go through it in that order and bounce back and forth from text to text. So the reason that that's more effective is because, again, you're weaving in these ideas in order to identify theme. By the time the reader, me, gets through your paper, I feel like you've written a really unified assignment. The alternative to this, the one that I think is less effective and likely, not 100%, but likely cannot score in that A range, is analyzing The Wasteland and then analyzing Darkness, and in the conclusion trying to wrap it all up together. I think that that's just, it's okay, but it's less effective than weaving these things, like interlocking them together. So that's what this part 1 structure is kind of reminding you to do or suggesting is the most effective. So you would make your point, and then you would analyze the evidence from both of the texts to support your point. You would make your next point and analyze evidence from both of those texts. Of course, this is just a quick overview, so you might have 2 points. If you can write a 4-page paper with 2 points, that's fine with me. You might have 3 points, you might have 4 points. It really just depends on you. And the other thing that I want to talk about here in structure part 1 is sort of like a balance. You don't have to have exactly a 50-50 balance of talking the same amount about one text that you do about the other. It's okay for them to be a little bit off. 40-60 is fine. 70-30 might also be okay, although I think you're stretching it and you'd have to be an extremely effective writer to pull it off. 80-20 is too much. What I mean by that is, like 80% talking about Darkness and then only 20% talking about The Wasteland. So I think that would be a little bit too much. And if you're concerned about balance, then let me know. But I think just as long as you're engaging with both of the texts in as equal of a manner as possible, that's going to be enough of a balance for the structure of your paper. So things to think about there. All right, so I think that pretty much covers everything from part 1. now we can look at the structure of really kind of the details of each paragraph. Most of this is a lot of what you saw from the first essay. I'm going to kind of sweep through it pretty quickly. Your introduction should start with a hook sentence. It should identify the texts, the authors, and summarize both of them, the two that you've selected. Don't talk about your secondary source in your introduction unless it's 100% warranted. I imagine it won't be, you never know, but it likely won't be, especially if you're picking a scholarly article. If you are, and if that scholarly article is not a jumping off point in something you disagree with, then I wouldn't reference it in your introduction. And then of course end your introduction with a thesis statement. And if you have not already watched the feedback video from your first paper, if I needed to, I commented on everyone's thesis statements, where appropriate. So if you need to improve your thesis, you will find feedback in that video. Of course, your thesis is going to be a little bit different because we're looking at theme here, but you do want to end your introduction with that theme-based thesis. Your body paragraphs should really do the same thing. The only thing that will be different is if you are or when you are pulling from your secondary sources, that content should be incorporated into your body paragraphs as well. I have it down here after you have already analyzed the text for yourself, but you get to decide where it's going to be best appropriate. Just make sure that you don't, again, do one of two things. Don't start your paragraph by talking about your secondary source. This is your paper. These are your ideas, your analysis. You should be the voice that frames all of your paragraphs. The other thing you don't want to do in your paragraphs using your secondary sources is just paraphrase their ideas and move on, because one, it looks like you're just source dropping, that you're not really engaging with the text, and two, it can have the effect of a logical fallacy in which you think you're correct because a scholar agrees with you, or because this is what the scholar said. That's like enough said. You don't need to say anything else. So you don't want to do that. You are the person doing all the work here. You have to engage with that secondary source in some way. So and it can't be just so-and-so agrees. Yeah, pretty much everything else is the same. So your works cited page should have 3 citations, right? You're at a minimum. I mean, it can have more depending on the sources you're looking at, but I don't want you to look at more than 2 texts in terms of analysis. If you feel compelled to look at more than 2, let me know. I will likely decline your request to look at more than 2, but in certain circumstances, maybe. The reason I say that is because a lot of students will want to include a 3rd text just to kind of meet a page requirement. That's not an effective way to get that 4 pages. The goal is to dig deep. So I'll probably say no, but if you have good reason for it, then maybe I will say yes. So minimum 3 citations, 1 for text number 1, 1 for text number 2, and then 1 for your scholarly article, or if you are a student who wants to engage with a critical theory text, then that would be the alternative. Here's an example introduction that you guys can read through, but it does really kind of walk through exactly how I've structured these notes or this assignment sheet. There is a hook sentence, there's a summary of one of the texts, there's a summary of the second text, and then we have the thesis statement at the end. It doesn't mention any secondary sources in the introduction. It's a fine introduction. It's developed quite nicely. It doesn't need to be too wordy. All right, so some small techie things. A full 4 pages is the length of this. Of course, I want you to have MLA 8th edition. The 4 pages does not include the works cited page. I want you to go all the way to the bottom of that 4th page without having to fudge it. Don't go over 10 pages, please. I think that would be too much. I would probably stop reading after page 10. Use in-text citations, use standard grammar and academic writing. You guys did a great job on paper 1, so I expect also good things for paper 2. Turn it in on Blackboard. So the rubric is pretty much the same. I'm looking at all of the same criteria. Really the thing I want to talk about is the language of the rubric, changes from close read to theme. That's not really a big deal. But here in evidence, this is where I have added in the essay engages with a scholarly article. So any paper where you want to score in the A range for evidence, again, really needs to engage with a scholarly article and not just use it in agreement with your ideas. I'm going to talk in another video about scholarly research, so I hope that will help you find a good scholarly article to use. But that's where I'm housing that component of this assignment. So I think that covers everything. I'm not going to look through the whole rubric. That would be annoying. All right. If you guys have questions, if you need clarification, if you want to do something slightly different that I've mentioned here and you have to kind of get approval for it, send me an email. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with here.